This is episode 543 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing, president of the Rio Grande Foundation, Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. I am very pleased to be joined this week by Pete Dinelli. He is a candidate. He's been a candidate, I should say. He is currently a writer and blogger about a variety of public policy issues, mostly confined to the city of Albuquerque, but certainly the state of New Mexico as well. And we'll talk a little bit about that, how you can find his information. And we're going to talk mostly about homeless policy and homeless issues. But welcome to Tipping Point, Pete.
Thank you, Paul. I really appreciate the opportunity to have the ability to have a healthy discussion on the issue of homelessness in Albuquerque.
Yeah. So first and foremost, talk a little bit about yourself and your political history in,
Sure.
Especially in the city. Have you ever run for state office, or are you limited to the city of Albuquerque?
No. First of all, I was born and raised in Albuquerque. I have raised a family. I'm 71 years of age now. So was my wife. She was born and raised in Albuquerque. But I have been a licensed attorney now for 42 years. Most people, when they see me, they think, well, you're a politician. The reality of it is I've spent 42 years of my life in the profession of practicing law, mostly as a trial attorney. I began my career as an assistant attorney general under then Attorney General Tony Anaya. I then continued my work with Attorney General Jeff Bingaman. And I later became an assistant district attorney where I worked for Steve Schiff, the former congressman. And I also went into private practice, had my own law firm. But over the years, I've been an assistant attorney general, assistant district attorney. I've been a chief public safety officer for the city of Albuquerque. I was also chief, that is the number 2 individual at the district attorney's office, chief deputy district attorney under Jeff Romero. And a number of years ago, I went to work and served 8 years with the city of Albuquerque, where I was the assistant, that is a deputy city attorney in charge of the Safe City Strike Force, overseeing nuisance abatement program. And I was later appointed as the chief public safety officer by Mayor Chavez. My political career, which is most people know me from, has been very limited. I was a city councilor for 4 years back in the 30 some odd years ago. And again, that's nonpartisan. Mm-hmm. And then 10 years ago, I ran after 30 years of time expiring. I ran for mayor again. Both times I lost. And but I felt that I was able to contribute something to the discussions of all the issues facing Albuquerque over the last 27 years. So my government service has been 27 years, mostly with the city, but also my private practice. I've been in private practice now for 15, 16 years. So I've had a very diverse career in not just in dealing with the city, but also in private practice, because my private practice is all civil, right. Strictly civil. Business, in fact, business background.
Now, would it be fair to describe, you'd be considered a Democrat? You consider yourself a Democrat?
Oh, I don't hide that at all. I consider myself a strong Democrat.
Okay.
Some people would say that I'm progressive. Others would say you're a conservative. The reality of it is I'm a Democrat.
I think it depends on the issue, and I think that's something we'll flesh out a little bit on
that I think is really very accurate. But I have no doubt that I'm a Democrat.
You're definitely a critic of Mayor Keller as well.
I'm a critic of Mayor Keller, as well as been a very staunch critic of Trump.
Right.
Very strong critic of Trump. I've been a very strong critic of Governor Martinez.
Okay.
And so I guess the argument I would make is that I'm very bipartisan when it comes to the criticism that I level against elected officials. Because to me, it's the issues that matter.
But we've also known each other for a long time, and
Correct.
we certainly don't agree on everything. But
that's an understatement, Paul. We've had very healthy discussions, and that's what I've always enjoyed about you. We were able to have what I feel have been civil discussions on issues that we disagree on, and I've never pretended to try to suck up to the conservatives, let alone the progressives. So
you won't get very far sucking up to conservatives in the state of New Mexico. But,
I agree with that.
Pete Dinelli, PETEDINELLI.com. That is where you blog. How long have you been a blogger in this?
I started
site?
the blog 6 years ago, and it really has taken off. I'm average in any given year. I've averaged between 75 to 80,000 views and reads of the blog, and you can read it at www.PeteDinelli.com. And I try to publish an article 5 days a week. And what I pride myself is I make it very clear it's news and commentary. And what I look at and what I do the research on is the news media. I look at all the TV stations, the Albuquerque Journal, the newspapers throughout the state. And I do my research on what the news of the day is, giving citations. I actually give links, and then I give my commentary and my take. And I hope that because of my years in private practice as well as in public service, that I give a very unique perspective, not only just as an attorney for 42 years, but also as a professional that has actually run for office, not once, but 3 times. And I do want to emphasize I've never run in partisan races. That is, I've never run as a Democrat. It's always been in city government.
All right. Well, we, like I said, we've known each other for a long time, but this is your first appearance on Tipping Point, New Mexico. And it was precipitated by a recent event. Judge Browning, federal judge here locally, a Republican-leaning fellow, he put together a panel discussion at UNM's law school on homelessness and homeless policy. I was on that panel. There were some people from the city. There was other folks. It was a diverse panel in a lot of ways. Brad Day, who's an advocate. He's a conservative. He's an advocate for safe outdoor spaces. We can talk a little bit about that, what that means.
Yes.
But you definitely were among the more passionate and knowledgeable people in the audience there. I said that you should have probably had a seat at the dais, but it was a very limited. We were talking about an hour and 10, hour and 15 minutes.
Let me explain that organization is called In a Court.
Right.
And that organization consists of federal judges, state district court judges, metro judges, as well as members of the bar. And it's varying degree members. I've been practicing for 42 years, and as a result, I'm referred to as a barrister. But we also have law students, and we also have attorneys that are in private practice. And that organization is a very prominent organization, and we talk about issues. What bothered me about the panel, and again, the panel was last Tuesday. The panel had 6 individuals, I believe. Mm-hmm. But what bothered me about the panel is that it really, to me, it was somewhat one-sided because it really did not flesh out the real issues facing the homeless and what we're dealing with.
Right.
And it never really got into the great details. What I was very disappointed in is that it was one-sided in the sense that you had the ACLU that was there. That is not an actual member, but a very prominent civil rights attorney that talked about the homeless. You also had a provider that was there. And you also had Mr. Day, who talked about his program. Mm-hmm. But the reality is they glossed over so much. And over the last 3 years, I've written extensively on the homeless issue. And I've even lectured on it to try to flesh out exactly what's going on with the city, because I'm very disappointed in the direction the city is going.
And there was 2 people from the city
Correct.
On that panel. And briefly before you go on, because I do want to give you an opportunity to flesh out your own views on the homeless situation, which you have written about. My take was we need to not have homeless in parks, on public rights of way, in the stoops of businesses. How we address the problem beyond that, I am more flexible on. I think Brad Day and the idea of safe outdoor spaces has is one opportunity. Making sure that people are in the facilities that are available, or making facilities available to them, is another. I'm not a proponent of the city. The city was very, pushing much more forward on housing first. Give them a house or apartment, and that'll solve the problem. So,
to me,
where do you come down?
You've identified something which we do agree on, and I believe that what the problem is that we have a housing first program that the mayor has initiated now for the last 6 years. But the message that I want to deliver, I actually have 5 messages that I'm hoping to convey to you.
Great.
During this presentation. First of all, the first message is the city as a community, we have a moral obligation to help the homeless. I want to make that very clear. We have a moral obligation to help the homeless. And those that we need to help are the mentally ill and also the drug addicted. Those are the 2 chronic areas that we need to address. The second message that I want to convey is that we have to understand that homelessness will never be eliminated. It's not going to be eliminated, but it has to be managed. And it has to be managed by government. The third message is that we must address the factors that are creating the homeless. And those factors, the 3 main ones, are poverty and job availability. But the 2 other ones, mental illness as well as drug addiction, are also 2 major contributors to our homeless problem.
Now we're gonna have a conversation here, and
Okay.
I appreciate that, and I just want to question you or push back a little bit
Sure.
on the poverty issue. Now, clearly, poverty is a challenge, but from a certain perspective, joblessness shouldn't be much of a challenge, because you talk to any business, especially those in the basic service industry, McDonald's, your Walmarts, whatever, they're in desperate need of people. But I believe, my personal belief is that a lot of the people who would be able to take those jobs to get out of poverty suffer from the mental illness and the drug addiction that preclude them from those jobs.
When I talk about poverty, what I'm referring to is that there's a certain element of our society, of our community rather, that do not make enough money for affordable housing. And that's where government steps in to get subsidized. That's when I talk about poverty, we have a little different perspective of
Fair
what I'm
enough.
referring
Okay.
to. The fourth message...
We'll talk about housing in a little bit in a second.
Okay. The fourth message that I want to deliver is that we have to understand that quite often homelessness is not a matter of choice. It's not. And but on the other side of the coin, there's a large percentage of those people that are homeless that want to be left alone. And either it's because they're drug addicted, or they don't want to be involved with housing that requires all sorts of, the government subsidized housing that requires all sorts of rules and regulations they have to follow. But the fifth and final message that I want to make it very clear is that being homeless is not a crime. But on the other side of the coin, that does not give an individual who's homeless the right to commit crime. And when I talk about that, I'm talking about the laws that we have in place dealing with vagrancy, dealing with our parks, and being able to camp where they want, how they want, on anybody's property they want. That's what I refer to with that not being a crime, but that doesn't give you a right to commit crime. Now, what always amazes me is that are the actual definitions of homelessness. There are so many out there. And I really want to phrase this because I want to talk about the actual numbers we have in Albuquerque.
Okay.
But to do that, we have to talk about the various definitions of homelessness. And this is where my research is coming into play. What I discovered quickly, and again, this was like 5 years ago, always you kept hearing the providers, the charitable providers, saying we have a homeless crisis. We have between 5,000 and 7,000 homeless in Albuquerque. Some providers even go as far as saying we have 10,000 homelessness in Albuquerque. But it really gets down to how are they defining homelessness?
Mm-hmm.
A good example is the Albuquerque public school system. I think you may be aware how APS defines homelessness. The Albuquerque public school system says we have a problem with having children who are homeless. The way they define homeless, that is, the Albuquerque public school system defines it as a child who does not have a permanent address. That's their definition. Well, the reality of it is that doesn't mean they're actually homeless. That doesn't mean they're out in the streets.
Mm-hmm.
It means they don't have an address. They may have a parent that is taking care of them, two parents that are shuffling these kids back and forth, whatever. But that is their definition of homeless. That is a child who does not have a permanent address. Charitable organizations, depending on who you're talking about, and by the way, we have 8 providers in the Albuquerque area. The charitable service providers define homelessness basically as homeless as those who seek their help, who are seeking their assistance, whether it be for shelter, whether it be for food, whether it be for clothing, or for a period of time. So that's another area of definitions. What I found that believe it or not, the federal government does have a very strong definition of homelessness that I think is very clear.
Mm-hmm.
They define, and I'm talking about the HUD, Housing, Urban and Development, they define homelessness as individuals who lack the resources and support networks to obtain permanent housing. It's pretty straightforward. I'll repeat that. HUD defines homelessness as individuals who lack resources and support networks to attain permanent housing. Now, under that HUD definition, they break it down into 4 major categories, and this is something that I think you and your viewers, your listeners, will find interesting. First, there's literally homeless individuals. Those individuals living in a place not meant for human habitation, in emergency shelters, in transitional housing, or exiting an institution where a person is temporarily residing.
Okay.
So that's the literal homeless.
Even that strikes me as a bit of a broad definition, because shelters are, there's a lot of people who struggle with homelessness who we don't consider oftentimes true homeless because they are in a shelter somewhere and they have the wherewithal to manage that process. Whereas the people out sleeping on the streets are what I would call literal homeless.
Okay, and again,
I know I'm not calling you into question.
No.
Definition.
There are 3 other categories.
Yeah,
that's just the first category.
Sure.
The literal homeless.
Okay.
The second category are those that are in imminent risk of homelessness.
Okay.
Those individuals are in imminent risk of homelessness, and that's what you're referring to. And again, I think the argument can be made, what we're dealing with are people that are maybe 1 paycheck away from being kicked out of their home. So that is the imminent risk of homelessness. The third category are homeless under other federal statutes. And we have other federal statutes that come into play, whether it be individuals that are been released from prison, for example, that have nowhere to live. There are other definitions is what I'm trying to get. And then the fourth category is the one that kind of shocked me, because they come out and say the fourth category is those that are fleeing or attempting to flee from domestic violence. That's a fourth separate category.
Right.
It's such a chronic problem that HUD has decided that we're going to make that the fourth category.
Okay.
So to summarize that, again, you have this broad definition, and then you have 4 subcategories. I don't want to sound too wonkish when I talk about that. So what we have now is an overall definition of homelessness with the 4 categories. But then you have to ask the question, well, how many do we really have in Albuquerque? And I think that's where the rubber hits the road. And this is where I get into a little bit of hot water, because I challenge that the homeless crisis is not as severe as the charitable providers and as the Keller administration is trying to say it is. And I have to rely upon what is referred to as what is called the point-in-time program.
Right.
This was referred to at this meeting that we had at In the Court. the other night. And what the point in time program is, it's an actual count that is done by the federal government. And every major community in the city, in the country, has to participate in this annual count of homeless. And funding is allocated, and each individual community sends out surveyors that go out and identify the number of homeless. Paul, let me throw this out at you. How many homeless do you think we actually have in Albuquerque? What number do you feel is
2,000?
2,000. You are very close. However, a lot of people would disagree with you, and that's what I was trying to point out before. Your charitable providers and individual and organizations and the city think it's like 5,000 or 7,000. The statistics that are coming out really do not support that, and that is the point in time program. They've done this now for the last 12 years, and they have published actual numbers. So let's look at the last year's point in time. And again, the point in time actually breaks down the homeless numbers in 3 categories. Those that are unsheltered, they count those. Right. They go around all around town. They go to the parks. They go underneath the freeways. They go to the various open space areas, and they count as many as they possibly can.
And those are the ones that most people would say are the most big problematic.
Yes.
The ones that are causing issues.
Correct.
Etc.
Those are the chronic homeless.
Yeah.
The second level of homelessness is counted are those that are in shelters.
Right.
Whether it be at New Day, whether it be at Hope Works, those that are the city shelters. The city has 2 shelters, so they count those. And then the third category are those that are in transitional housing. And so the point in time, again, they spend millions of dollars every year to come up with the figures. And it was really amazing that back in 2022, in January 22, the numbers that they came up with. The point in time homeless survey, they reported the homelessness in Albuquerque. And in Albuquerque, they found 1,311 homeless in all those, combined in all 3 of those categories. 900 of the 1,311, 940 were in emergency shelters.
Okay.
Of the also 197 were unsheltered.
Wow, that's a lot smaller
Correct.
number than you would think, because you can't drive past any major intersection in this town, and sometimes there's multiple guys on every corner.
And I'm hoping to get into that.
All right.
And the reason for that.
Okay.
And there were 174 in transitional housing. So again, back in 2022, in January of 2022, we had 1,311 homeless, 940 were in emergency shelters, 197 were unsheltered, and 174 were in transitional housing. All that was blown apart.
Okay.
What happened in 2023, January of this year, of 2023, they did another homeless count. And it was reported to the New Mexico Legislative Finance Committee that we had a dramatic spike in homelessness.
40% increase.
It
right?
was you've got your, it's 48%.
Okay.
The Legislative Finance report came out, and they said that the preliminary estimates for this year, the finalized report, was that there was a 40% uptick in the state's homelessness population. We went from upwards of 2,600 homeless statewide to close to 4,000 individuals.
Okay.
Was the number that they came out with. Now, how does that relate to Albuquerque? They were able to break that down as far as Albuquerque is concerned. What the last year's, and again, these are the preliminary numbers, and by the way, the final numbers will be released in a matter of days. It's towards the end of August when they released it. What they found this past year, that Albuquerque has 780 more people in Albuquerque than in the rest of the state. we had an increase of 780 individual homelesses. So according to the report, Albuquerque's homelessness went from 1,311 in 2022 to 2,091 this year in 2023, according to the PIT report, preliminary numbers released to the LFC. And still, that number is the number you identified, 2,000, roughly 2,000. The actual number is 2,091, according to the PIT number. So here you have the definition of homelessness. We now have an understanding of what are the numbers we're actually working with. But what blows my mind, I don't want to say blows my mind. We now have to look at what is the city doing? And that's where it really gets a little bit questionable.
Okay.
You raised the issue of how come we're seeing so many? And I would submit the argument to that is that we have had a situation now where the homeless now have become far more aggressive. And that is what's contributing to the problem. A lot of it has to do with the law enforcement's approach to homeless. Keep in mind what we have are laws that are in place that some people refer to them as homeless laws, prevention laws. That includes the camping. That includes the camping in parks, on streets, and whatever. And I think what has actually happened is that we now have a settlement in place where the city has now adopted a program of non-arrest and civil citation. They also have adopted a program of disbursement. Now, keep in mind
they have
yes,
disbursements, implying that camping and those kinds of things are not to be tolerated, because that's not my reading on.
They're breaking up homeless encampments. Keep in mind what has happened is you have Coronado Park. Is probably the best example I can give.
Sure.
Coronado Park you had upwards to 75 to 100 individuals that were camping there every night. Coronado Park became a big nuisance.
Right.
It became a magnet for crime. You had rapes, murders. You had mental illness, people that were wandering the area. And the mayor decided that they needed to break it up. This was a park that the mayor actually advocated to be used as a de facto homeless encampment, a city-sanctioned de facto homeless encampment. Although he never came out and said it, that's what happened.
Right.
So they broke it up. They also, that resulted in, and we are now in litigation over that with the American Civil Liberties Union.
We as in the city of Albuquerque on one side and the ACLU on the other.
Correct.
Right.
They are contending that that it was unconstitutional to break that homeless encampment without proper notification, and that there was a violation of civil rights, that these people were not doing anything. And the reality of it is that the city found it to be a nuisance, and it would become such a magnet for crime that we had to do something. And again, you're talking about rapes and murders. They had 3 murders in the last 2 years there. You had a lot of drug transactions going on. The park became so contaminated that they did a biohazard and discovered that the park grounds itself was contaminated. The city really had no choice but to break it up. And to keep in mind, to me, I think what happened in Coronado Park rests solely on the shoulders of Mayor Tim Keller, because he allowed it to happen.
Right.
What also had happened is that the city created this new division, this new department, the Albuquerque Community Safety Department, where they're using teams of social workers and medical attention personnel that go out and they actually break up homeless encampments. Keep in mind, the city does not arrest. All they can do is cite. And that was because of what is referred to as the McClendon. So my understanding is what the city has is a disbursement now, a disbursement program, where they're breaking up as many encampments as they find them. But the problem is they only come back the next day.
Right.
The settlement that we have under the McClendon program does not allow. The Albuquerque Police Department now has a policy of no arrest and only criminal citation.
Do you think they should arrest homeless people for occupying public spaces, or would that be a useful approach?
The problem we have is we don't have a choice. We have a federal lawsuit, a settlement in place that prohibits the Albuquerque Police Department from making arrests.
Right.
However, it is still discretionary. If a felony is occurring in the presence of an officer, they can arrest. It really gets back to the nature of the crime.
Felony, though.
That's correct.
There's a lot of crimes that I would like to see people arrested for that don't involve felonies.
That's your problem. That under the federal lawsuit, again, they cannot, for nonviolent crime, you cannot make arrest. This is a lawsuit that happened 25 years ago.
Right.
And it was related to the overcrowding down at the detention center, which was the high rise. Remember the high rise on Lomas and 3rd Street, I believe is where it was located. They tore it down last year.
Yeah.
But that resulted in a brand new jail having been created on the west side.
Right.
And because of and what was happening, you had severe overcrowding. A jail that was only was built to house 850 was housing 1,200, 1,300.
Those problems don't exist anymore.
Those problems no longer exist.
Right.
But they settled that case.
Right.
And that settlement still is in place. The Albuquerque Police Department will not make arrests for nonviolent crimes. And that, how it translates into the homeless, it relates to camping in parks, camping on the streets.
Does that include shoplifting then?
Yes, it does. It does include shoplifting. So that's part of our problem. We have a federal lawsuit with a court order in place. It's not what I want to do as much as it is that you have a police department but the police department also implemented a policy that made it very clear. It does not eliminate the discretionary authority of a police officer to make an arrest when it deals with a felony. And there are circumstances, and that's the emphasis that I want to put on. The way the SOP reads, unless circumstances warrant an arrest, the police officer can make an arrest and take him down to the jail. That philosophy also conflicts with the philosophy is the answer to the homeless jail and warehousing, and I submit it is not. That we have to come up with a program in place where you're dealing with transitional housing. Now, let's talk about what is the city...
Let me just real quick. So we're under the consent decree with the DOJ that started during the Berry administration. That deals with how other ways in which the police interact with the public and criminals.
Correct.
McClendon goes back much further. Is this something that we're going to be living under for the rest of our lives, or what's the deal with that? How do you get out from under that?
I don't think so. I personally do not think so. And now I'm talking like a lawyer. I think the city needs to be far more aggressive and seek modification of the McClendon decree.
Okay.
I think that they need to be very aggressive in doing that, where they go ahead and untie the police department to allow them to make arrests on nonviolent felonies. I also think the DOJ, I've said this repeatedly, we're at the point where we are now coming in compliance with 3 of the major requirements of the DOJ when it comes to the level. We have 3 levels that they have to come into compliance with at 93 compliance levels.
Right.
They have to reach 92% compliance in all 3 of those levels. We've reached 100% compliance in 2 of those levels. The 3rd compliance level, we're at 92%. We have to reach 90 to 95% in all 3 compliance levels. We're almost there.
Right.
But the way it also reads is that once the city becomes into compliance with all 3 compliance levels, we have to have 2 years of consistent compliance. I have argued this repeatedly. We're at the point where we can say, I believe we can say, we have completed. We have basically there's substantial compliance with the consent decree that it should be dismissed. And I've said that repeatedly.
Okay.
And again, it gets back with the city attorney's office and the city now taking on the DOJ and saying, we need to have a court hearing on this so we can establish that we are now in substantial compliance and there's no need for another 2 years of this DOJ consent decree to move on and to loosen up. What happened, and I also want to emphasize that over the last 8 years, APD has made significant progress in implementing constitutional policing practices. And that also relates to the homeless.
Right.
And the mentally ill. We can't forget what brought the Department of Justice here in the first place 10 years ago. A lot of people don't realize it, but throughout the United States, there's 8 to 10 consent decrees involving a lot of cities. Those consent decrees, the overwhelming majority of them relate to 2 things: racial profiling and also targeting and civil rights violations. Albuquerque's is totally unique. The DOJ came here because of the way that the police department was treating the homeless. And again, you had excessive use of force and deadly force involving the mentally ill. And that was
James Boyd.
James Boyd.
Foothills, right?
The Foothills.
Yep.
You had, and they also had another one. James Boyd was the mentally ill homeless individual that was camping in the open space. He pulled 2 knives, and they basically, as far as I'm concerned, the SWAT team took him out.
Right.
They released dogs on him. That lawsuit, a lawsuit ensued.
Mm-hmm.
That case was settled for $5 million. And there was a specific finding that the Albuquerque Police Department used excessive force. There was another case involving a mentally ill individual who was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. That lawsuit involved an individual that he was an Iraqi war veteran. He was holding a gun to his head and talking to his mother on a cell phone. The Albuquerque Police Department, again, an order was given to take him out if he took a move towards the police officers. He took 1 step forward and he was shot. That resulted in a $10 million judgment against the city. There was a jury that found that this individual was more of a threat to himself than the Albuquerque Police Department. Again, our DOJ relates to how Albuquerque Police Department dealt with the homeless.
Right.
And mandated all sorts of training. And so
let me. We only have a couple minutes to go. Unfortunately, we could have. I know you've got enough information here that we could have another podcast right after this. But let me. We specifically said we were going to talk about 2 related issues.
Okay.
And I want to get your thoughts on these before we let you go. Housing first, and the safe spaces issue. Related in a way. True housing involves subsidized apartments and whatnot. Safe spaces are essentially a managed, hopefully safer approach to, essentially public camping, but in voluntary arrangements. You don't like that option very much. So just kind of give me a quick couple of points on each of those.
The Housing First program, we've adopted that. And that is part of the federal standards that in order to get secure federal housing, federal housing, subsidized housing assistance, you have to follow that criteria. And the Housing First approach is that the government will provide housing first to individuals, whether it be through subsidized housing or, for that matter, 100% housing. But it has to be actual housing. The city is spending, and this is the figure that always blew my mind, in 2022, we spent $40 million to assist the homeless. A large lion's share of that went to subsidized housing. This year, we're going to be spending another $60 million. So over the last 2 years, we're spending upwards to $100 million to deal with the homeless and housing. And a lot of those, we're looking at contracts, whether it be for subsidized housing or for that matter, to provide government assistance to provide housing. Part of this is that the Keller administration has now implemented this safe outdoor spaces.
Mm-hmm.
And it really flies in the face of what they're trying to accomplish with the Housing First program. Safe outdoor spaces are what it implies. There are government-sanctioned encampments, tent encampments, to house upwards to 50 individuals that has to provide for places to wash.
Yeah.
It has to provide fencing, and there's all sorts of rules and regulations to be able to live in these sanctioned communities.
Some level of safety for the campers themselves,
Correct.
vis-a-vis their fellow others, and then the public surrounding them.
No drug using.
Right.
And Mr. Day brought up the fact that he proclaimed himself to be such a great guy because he wanted a safe outdoor space on the Knoll. What he didn't tell people, and what he underplayed, is the fact what he wanted is a safe outdoor space for 50 women who were victims of trafficking, sex trafficking. And the location they wanted was a location that was within walking distance of a truck stop.
Right.
A truck stop that has been identified as a chronic location for prostitution. You're talking to a former prosecutor, okay? And I have prosecuted violent crime cases. You do not put women who have been victimized because of sex trafficking in shelter, in tents. They need safe, secure housing, permanent housing.
Now, I'm going to have to interrupt you there because, and I don't disagree with anything you just said, but there are limited spaces available for the spaces. I'm not excusing that as the option, but anyway, it's a very tricky proposition, and City Council is obviously kind of taken a step back from originally kind of supporting it to pushing back against it. It may or may not play a role at all, and maybe that space was not the better.
Well, the City Council went ahead and adopted Keller's program of safe outdoor spaces.
Right.
They went ahead and allowing 2 in each individual City Council districts for a total of 18. The problem I have with it, they've eliminated the surrounding property owners' ability to appeal those decisions. So right now what you have is a city that has unilateral authority to go ahead and to allow a safe outdoor space, 2 in each of the City Council districts, without public input. And what they call them are permissive uses.
Right.
Before, they were to be conditional uses, where you had to make an application, you had to give notice to surrounding property owners that the city is going to go ahead and allow this city-sanctioned program, and the property owners had the right to appeal that. They got rid of that right. Now the city can do this unilaterally, which I think is just wrong. To me, surrounding property owners have rights too. Yep. They should be able to appeal that and have input. And the thing that
we got to let it go. Sorry, Pete. Pete Dinelli, DINELLI.com. You can find a lot of his all of his writing there, and we'll have to have you back on because this problem's not going away, and you've got a lot more to say about it, and I appreciate that. And a great conversation. Thanks for listening.
I enjoyed it. I hope I didn't get too animated.
No.
I guess it's
40 minutes flies by. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.